We're back. Welcome to this week's episode of Insight. During this week's show, we're going to cover three specific topics. The first one is going to be what I found out about some of the negotiations that are going on behind the scenes in regards to Artsakh and the peace deal that's being negotiated, specifically on the Western angle on it in regards to Artsakh. Then we're going to move on to speak about the developments with the ICC, which is the International Criminal Court, and the possibility of Armenia joining it in full. And lastly, we're going to cover what's been the news of the last couple of days, which is the next possible aggression by the Aliyev regime that's being organized against Armenia. We're going to start with the first topic of the week, which is sort of an update on what I've learned about the negotiations that are going on about the peace deal with the Aliyev regime, in particular things that are related to Artsakh. We actually had an interview about this that went into some of these issues in greater detail, so whoever is interested, you can actually go back and watch that interview from last week. I'm just going to give a more broad outlines. The first line was we'll start with the negotiations themselves. The negotiations are essentially at the dead end. All this talk about peace is around the corner and that we shouldn't do anything in regards to the blockade because it's going to impact the negotiations is essentially a lie. There's actually no possibility in the short term of anything being signed. And for essentially one particular reason is because the Armenian side at this point refuses to sign anything that doesn't have cleared out rights, securities, guarantees for the people of Artsakh. At the same time, the Aliyev regime is refusing to sign anything that does have rights and securities that are spelled out and guaranteed for the people of Artsakh. Now let's go into greater detail about this issue of rights and securities. First and foremost, we need to understand what the Aliyev regime's goals are in this case, and that is they want two things. They want ethnic cleansing in Artsakh and no peace deal. That's their goal, and that's the thing that they're working towards. In reality, what this talk of rights and securities is becoming through third-party actors like the United States is essentially window dressing for ethnic cleansing. It is the difference between the West, in this case the United States, and the Aliyev vision of things is that the Aliyev version of things is ethnic cleansing with far more harsher measures, the sort of the bloody version of it, while the Western one is to sort of have something, a much softer version of ethnic cleansing. And this is specifically being pushed by people in the United States State Department, like Louis Bono, who is the U.S. representative in this area, who is a particularly vile character when it comes to his hatred, his passionate, pathological hatred of the people of Artsakh. And I think what we need to do is we also need to move towards defining in very clear terms what do rights and securities mean, because we need to come up in a very doctrinal manner. If there's going to be rights and securities, what are the spelled out 1, 2, 3s on those rights and securities? Point one in rights and securities has to be continued local democratic governance. You cannot expect the people that live in a democracy like Artsakh to join a slave society like the one that Aliyev is running. And in fact, there's no precedent in history of any people that are free voluntarily joining a system like the one in Aliyev, where people have absolutely no rights and securities and have no way of acting as citizens to protect their interests. So that's number one. Number two, and this is key, is international mediation. That is negotiations between Baku and Stepanakert that are actually mediated by third parties who come up with proposals and, more importantly, guarantee the results of whatever is agreed to. So that's point number two. Point number three is that there needs to be an international presence on the ground to guarantee these rights, i.e., you cannot leave it to whatever the whims of the Aliyev regime is. It's got to be something where there are forces on the ground internationally that can actually enforce this agreement. Anything outside of these parameters is essentially nothing more than a cover for ethnic cleansing and genocide. This is very simple. We need to constantly say these 1, 2, 3 as our primary points. We need to simplify and repeat them and essentially draw a line. You either support these measures, you support this approach, or you're on the side of a fascist genocidal regime in Baku. It's your choice. Now let's look at the Western position. The current Western position, i.e. the EU and the United States, with the possible exception of France, is to come up with systems that are likely that the end goal and the end result will be the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh. Now, obviously, this is something that can change based on circumstances and public pressure and the politicization of the issue, but I'm just describing things as they are right now. What the West, and specific the United States, cares about is their reputational risk. Their red lines are reputational because what they don't want is they don't want mass graves and they don't want children with bloated bellies. However, this position that they have is becoming less and less tenable every day that goes by. And no one with a clear face or a straight face can actually make the case that this regime that is on a daily basis trying to starve and murder 120,000 Armenians in Artsakh has any right to rule them. In fact, this blockade for the last 9 or 10 months is actually the prima facie evidence that they should never have any say over the lives of any Armenians in Artsakh, and that we should look at other modalities which, one, to satisfy the international community, preserves the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan, but at the same time make sure that the Armenians of Artsakh are no way under the direct control of the regime in Baku. Now let's move on to the second topic of the week, which is the issue of the Rome Statute, the International Criminal Court. This week, the Armenian government indicated that it's going to send the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court to Parliament for ratification, which means most likely it's going to get ratified, given them the strong majorities that they have. Now, what this is essentially a mechanism which will allow you to bring other world leaders, and not just world leaders, whoever works for them, for human rights violations, and specifically in cases of genocide, you can actually bring them out and start prosecuting them. This has not happened over the last year and a half, and a couple of years actually, because of what I call the Putin problem, because the ICC actually indicted Vladimir Putin on what's going on in the war in Ukraine. And that would essentially mean, technically, any country that signs it would have a responsibility to arrest him, even though it's really not that simple. So that's been the reluctance in doing so. But it's very clear that what's going on with the Aliyev regime at this point and their aggressions and their possible future aggressions are far more relevant to us than any problems with Mr. Putin. I think once this is ratified, what this will allow us to do, for example, is to bring charges against him in an international criminal court for the war crimes that were committed during last September's invasion of Armenia, or the possible and the current ongoing genocide in Artsakh. And these are actually quite serious, is because these are significant reputational risks, because if the charges are ever brought, Aliyev is essentially limited to traveling to Belarus, Turkmenistan, and Turkey, and not too many other places. In the past, I would have been far more cautious with this, but given the situation that we're in, if you're ever going to take a chance or a risk, this would be it. And this is probably something that we should go ahead and move forward with as something that has deterrence capacities. Now let's move on to the third topic of the week, which is the possible and the likely near-term aggressions by the Aliyev regime against Armenia. All factors seem to indicate that there's a major operation of some kind that can be carried out against Artsakh or Armenia that might start any time in the next couple of days or the next couple of weeks. And there's a lot of things that are likely leading to this. And the first one is essentially the impasse in the negotiations, that the other side is frustrated that we're not giving up on the final point of the rights and securities of people in Artsakh. And in truth, there's really no room for any more concessions to make. So if he's expecting any more concessions, there really aren't any, outside of us being forced to put our stamp of approval on ethnic cleansing and genocide. Secondly, for Aliyev's purposes, there's almost a 3-year pattern in which you have the aggression to concession pipeline, i.e. you start an aggression of some kind, and as a result, either Armenia itself or gets pressured into making more concessions to him. The other indicator is there's massive weapons deliveries that are being flown in from Israel and Turkey, and you see them on a daily basis. The other thing is we know that there's actually significant mobilizations that are going on, and all of this is on camera. Now, what is suspicious about this, which makes us believe that this might actually be more posturing than reality, but we don't really know that, is that they're actually publicizing all of these troop movements, putting it on video, showing all the mobilizations very actively, which is something that they've never really done before. So it's really hard to know what they're actually going at this. What could be the driving factor is the deteriorating relationships between Armenia and Russia. Most likely, the Aliyev regime has already gotten a green light from the Russian Federation to launch another attack on us. And we'll cover this in next week's show as far as this worsening Armenian-Russian relationships and where this is going to. And I think the other thing that's possibly going to drive another aggression is that in reality, when it comes to reputational risk in the press, the Aliyev regime has essentially lost the narrative when it comes to Artsakh and to the Lachin corridor blockade, which is actually on a daily basis from all the major newspapers in the world, something that wasn't happening in the first 5-6 months of the blockade. They're essentially getting beaten up in all directions, and I think it's he needs to change the conversation there. And lastly, it's a timeline with weather. September is it's the annual Let's Attack Our Neighbor month in Aliyev's country. So, and September is important is because before winter sets in, and a lot of these areas where fighting goes on are really inoperable sometime between November and February or March. So all the aggressions need to happen before that. In conclusion, I think the last thing that could actually be leading to this aggression is what I call the dictator life cycle. You know, they usually start off as reputationally as younger reformers, and at some point, you know, they enter what I call their Gaddafi, Ceausescu, or Saddam stage, in which they actually start believing their own bullshit, and they don't essentially deal on a basis of rationality and think that they can capable of doing anything. And I think it's very clear that given his statements and his activities, our friend Ilham might be entering this late stage dictator stage. Before I finish today's show, we're going to leave you with our fundraising pitch. We are at the end of our summer fundraising drive. So what I'm going to ask all of you is get on our site, contribute, and preferably sign up to give on a monthly basis. We obviously do important work here, and we need your support to continue that work. Thank you for joining me in this week's episode of Insights.
There are many whites who are trying to solve the problem, but you never see them going under the label of liberals. That white person that you see calling himself a liberal is the most dangerous thing in the entire Western Hemisphere. He's the most deceitful. He's like a fox. And a fox is always more dangerous in the forest than the wolf. You can see the wolf coming. You know what he's up to. But the fox will fool you. He comes at you with his mouth shaped in such a way that even though you see his teeth, you think he's smiling and you take him for a friend.